Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final chapter of the book, Chapter 11. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of the semester. Hey, have you noticed you've been through a whole semester and I haven't changed clothes once? I shot all these videos, of course, in one day. So, Chapter 11, a lot like Chapter 10, it's a catch-all chapter, and it's what's happening in the last 20 years of jazz and what's happening right up till today. We start with a little introduction, and we go into a discussion that's a little broader than we've had in other chapters, in particular because you're about to leave the semester and we want you to go ahead from the class and explore so much of what is out there. There's so much great music. You've got a series of Dig Deepers. These are all active links to jazz magazines, and they all have fantastic content, both audio and video. Click on any of them, you'll love it. It's just fantastic material. Once we get you through the introduction, we start talking about a return to older traditions, because what we really saw with a resurgence of jazz in the 80s and 90s was a group of musicians called the Young Lions. They're all decidedly middle-aged lions now, but Wynton, Branford Marsalis, they really cut their chops and get their start playing with Art Blakey from Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers back in Chapter 7. We told you that was a training ground for young musicians. And we saw a lot of musicians return to an older mainstream style hard bop, post bop style jazz. And they took it very, very seriously, and they brought a lot of new stuff to the table. Some were quite conservative, like Wynton. Others had a far more broad view, like his brother Branford. Now, Wynton has pretty much always played straight ahead jazz, bebop, post bop, hard bop, swing. He's now fronting the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. He's crossed over into a lot of classical music as well. Whereas Branford does all that stuff, but he also went on the road with Sting, and he's played with a lot of other pop musicians. He started a hip-hop funk band. He's done movies, all kind of great stuff. You have a long discussion here between Wynton and Herbie. The purist and the crossbreeder duke it out. Well, oddly enough, the younger musician, the purist, is Wynton, and the crossbreeder, the guy who mixes a lot of different styles of jazz, is, guess who? Herbie Hancock, the guy that came to prominence with Miles Davis and all that incredible fusion stuff we studied at the beginning of Chapter 9. So they get into a long discussion here, and it actually gets a little heated, where Wynton's kind of saying, well, a lot of that fusion stuff isn't really jazz. And then he looks across the table and he sees he's talking to Herbie Hancock. He's like, well, except for you, Herbie. Of course, all of your stuff is fantastic. And he's right, it is. A lot of cool pictures in this section of people performing up in Albuquerque. My photographer friend Jim Gale shot all of these, and they're all just fantastic. I love Branford's picture here. That's a cool one. That's at the Outpost Performance Space. This is Wynton at Popejoy Hall. It's kind of cool. And then we get into some listening guides. The first one is Double Rondo on the River. This is from a film soundtrack that Wynton did. And it'll really show you that crossover. It's like Duke Ellington meets Mingus, meets some more modern styles of jazz. And you hear it in some of the improvisations. Even though it's very straight ahead swing in a lot of ways, you can hear these are modern guys. You can hear these are guys who know a lot of different styles of music, and they sort of bring that to the table, which is kind of cool. Again, some great dig deepers. Wynton's website, the Jazz at Lincoln Center, which is a fantastic website, lots of detail. And then we talk about some other mainstream musicians who are working today. I love John Pizzarelli. I think he's a great performer. Diana Krall, one of my absolute favorite singers. Nancy Wilson just passed away last year. Fantastic mainstream singer for many, many years. And then we get into more contemporary singers, people who are working now, people like Nora Jones, you've got her website. Jamie Cullum, who I think is one of the most talented young jazz artists out there today, who's crossing over strongly into the pop field. You've got from his first album, 20-something, which is 16 years old already now, which is just stunning. So he's 30-something now. Man, it goes fast. And then Esperanza Spalding, absolutely fantastic artist, fearless, nothing she can't do. Check out her websites. They're all really good. Austin City Limits, both of them did incredible Austin City Limit performances that you will really enjoy. Then we get into a discussion of smooth jazz. This became a controversy in the 80s and 90s as jazz musicians were searching for something more commercial. And one of the most popular was a guy named Kenny G. But it led to some controversy in the jazz world. You can read all about that here. And you've got a long article that actually paints a pretty balanced portrait of the issue. Hard to believe this, again, is 20 years old already. This is very contemporary stuff in my mind. But it was a real issue in the jazz world. Pat Metheny gets involved. You can read all about it. It was pretty controversial for a time. Again, we talk about some other smooth jazz artists, people like you met in Chapter 9, Grover Washington, Spyro Gyro, Chuck Mangione, people like that. And then we get into more contemporary things like hip-hop influences on jazz. Well, of course, rap, hip-hop, soul music, funk, they all come from jazz. And now we've come full circle, and the music is bringing itself back together. One of the most popular, and again, one of the most controversial, is a group called Us3. You can read all about them. They were sampling stuff from Blue Note Records. They didn't have legal rights. Then they did. It gets complicated, but it's really cool. Their hit tune was Cantaloupe Flip Fantasia, and here's a link to it on Spotify. You can follow along, of course. Here's a copy of one of their most recent albums. It's really good. And then you get into a broader discussion of hip-hop influences in jazz. In particular, a guy named Steve Coleman, who's doing something he calls M-Bass, which is very complicated new arts issue, but fascinating music. You've got several links to that. Then we get off into some of the guys that have branched off, like the Country Connection, in particular this group, Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. Nobody else like them on the planet. I equate them to a modern Benny Goodman Quartet. I really see them as kind of the modern version of that, and they're groundbreaking in so many different ways. It's really hard to discuss quickly. Read about it, listen to it. You've got a track from their very first album. It's called The Sinister Minister. Still great, holds up great 20 years later. And of course, they're still out on the road constantly. Go see them live. They're fantastic. We end the section with a few artists who just defy category because you never know what they're going to do next. John Zorn, for many years, held court at the Knitting Factory in New York. And sadly, that club has changed a lot. It's not the jazz club it used to be, but John Zorn's still out there. Amazing stuff. Django Bates, kind of the British version of John Zorn, also just hard to describe. Check him out. You've got some nice album titles here. Just recently, he did a cover of the entire Sgt. Pepper album in this crazy jazz band version. I can't describe it. You got to go hear it. It's awesome. Don Byron, again, Jim Gale. I love this photograph. This is up in Albuquerque at the Outpost Performance Space. He's mostly a clarinet player, but there's just nothing he can't play that's woodwind, and he's done an amazing array of wildly divergent albums. You never know what he's going to do next. Absolutely fascinating guy. The band Sex Mob, these are studio cats and New York performing cats who also occasionally do this band called Sex Mob, and they do these crazy alt things like taking all the films, all the James Bond films, and they made a CD of it again. Fresh in my mind. It's hard to believe it's already 20 years old, but really cool band. One of my absolute favorites, you heard her at the beginning of the semester singing Summertime. Here's Patricia Barber. She's on the road quite a bit, but when she's not, she lives in Chicago, and she plays a regular Monday night gig at the Green Mill. I'll show you more about that right at the end of the section when we talk about the appendices that are available here. Jaynara Bloom, awesome musician, fearless in blending so many different styles, dance, audible sounds, free jazz. A lot of times she'll do things like what you have in the book. She has an album called Chasing Paint. It's a tune called Jackson Pollock. There is no prearranged music. They look at Jackson Pollock paintings and they read it like the music. Make of that what you will, but it's incredible performing. And it's decidedly inspired by what Miles Davis did back in the 70s, and she's just branching out and doing a broader version of that, which is really cool. She's an awesome musician. Snarky Puppy, one of the hippest new bands out there. Google them, check them out. They're really cool. And we end with Brad Mehldau. Now, Brad's been around a while, but he's another artist who continues to reinvent himself on a regular basis. You have the tune Blackbird. He's covered the Lennon and McCartney, really Paul McCartney, tune from the Beatles, Blackbird. Everybody knows it. He's done a number of live versions. This is one of my favorites. But he also is doing constantly just new creative stuff. As I record this, we're in the middle of the COVID crisis, and he's been trapped in his home in the Netherlands for many months. And he wrote a piece called April Sweet 2020, and it's these ruminations on what we're going through right now. And I guarantee you, if you're watching this in 2030, 10 years from now, go check that album out because it's going to hold up. It's a masterful expression of what we're going through right now. He's that kind of artist. Really cool. And then we end with some final thoughts on the future of jazz. All right, once you go through that, I just want you to see very quickly that there are ancillaries in the book that go way beyond the class because, like I said before, what we want you to do next is go be the world's biggest jazz fan because we need more jazz fans in the world. So there are a series of appendices in the book that will help you discover jazz beyond the class. If you have a print version, these are actually perforated. You can rip them out, throw them in your suitcase, and go traveling. If you have the ebook, of course, you can print these out. I've been to most of these clubs in America, and you have very detailed club listings, current contact as best we can keep it, websites, phone numbers, links. Sometimes I tell you what food to order because I'm just that kind of full service guy. These are some of my favorite clubs in New York City, in New Orleans. The Spotted Cat, go down to Frenchman Street. It's so cool. Fritzl's is an old school place. Preservation Hall is the quintessential jazz place. In Chicago, again, I mentioned the Green Mill with Patricia Barber. There it is. If you're ever in Chicago on a Monday night, go. Andy's every night of the week is fantastic. Clubs in Memphis, clubs in Vegas, so on and so forth. And then we get to international clubs. Now, a lot of these I have not been to, but I know musicians who work there. So all of these have been personally recommended to me, or I know them from someplace in the jazz world, or some of them I've actually been to, which is pretty cool, particularly in the Netherlands. There's some great clubs in the Netherlands, man. That's Appendix A. Appendix B, jazz festivals. Now, again, as I'm filming this, we're in the middle of the COVID crisis, but if it's 2025, hopefully we're all clear by then, these festivals will be going on again. Jazz and Heritage Society, Jazz and Heritage Festival in New Orleans, absolute party. Newport Jazz Festival, can't recommend it highly enough. Telluride does a series of festivals every summer, and each one is more mind-blowing than the next. You've got a link to the main festival page, so on and so forth. I mentioned the Bix Beiderbecke Festival in Chapter 3. There's a link for that. And then you've got some websites. Appendix C takes you through current websites. Now, again, these are current as of December 2019. We update these on a regular basis, though, so if you're using the online book, they'll keep getting updated. If you have a print book, obviously you might have to plug it in into your search engine and find it. But lots of good places to get you started here. There's mountains of content here. You could spend the rest of your life just listening to this music and looking at stuff. And then finally, Appendix D. This is where I enter the world. I am a CD hog. I have about 4,000 CDs in my office. Drop by sometime, you can see them. And I know nobody uses CDs anymore. I know everybody streams everything. And of course, Spotify is out there, and Napster and all of those others, and they're fantastic. But I like the tangible. I like being able to read the liner notes. I want to know the whole story of the album. And of course, if you go further back, you're a vinyl head. That's great too. You can find great vinyl for 50 cents now in a lot of stores, and there's some pretty cool jazz stuff out there. So I talk about building a record collection. I connect you with some of the most important record labels. I talk about shopping for used CDs. I talk about life on the internet and what we're doing now. And it's all out there for you. There is a world to discover. So take what you've learned in this class. Go be the world's biggest jazz fan. We need you. Come see me at a live gig. If you do, walk up and say hello. Say, hey, I took your class. I'd love to visit with you.